Welcome to the presentation on the Idea Bridge Spirit Walk, and this is an immersive VR interactive project that we're working on. The presentation today is going to be talking about the process that each of us went through project together. To start off the presentation, I thought it might be nice just to go around each of us and introduce who to before we go into the actual presentation. So I'm Aaron Wood, and I'm a producer who was brought onto the project by Keith and Eugene. I'm a producer at Slurpee Studios, and I work alongside Katie Steed, who now going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm the creative director at Slurpee Studios. I was brought onto this project as the co-director by Keith and Eugene. So that's the role I've been fulfilling.
Great. Yeah, and I'm Keith Kuhudzai. I'm from Comexposed, and I'm pretty much what you'd call the executive producer, as I was running around trying to get the funding for this project locked, and I was very glad with Eugene's help that we managed to get this funding, and also Aaron and Katie, who helped us a lot in terms of creating the collaboration and making it work. And yeah, and I was also the music director of the project, and it was really fun and exciting and watching everything come to life.
Hi everyone, I am Eugene Ramirez Mapondera. I'm the co-founder of Comexposed. I'm a multimedia designer and creative director at Comexposed. And I'm one of the people who came up with the main concept, and I'm really excited to talk about the whole thing and how it all went.
Guys, so this is the core team. We have a few other members who've been working on the project as well. And throughout the presentation, we're going to flip into videos. So just before we talk about the actual film itself, should we just go through the other members of the team? So there was, Eugene, or Keith, do you want to introduce the other guys?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Or Keith.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Eugene.
All right, so part of the project requirements involved co-opting or inviting other partners or people who'd respond to an open call to contribute. Those were creatives from the Zimbabwean community. So I'll start off with Will, since he's the only UK representative or artist. He's a gentleman who goes by the name of Will Hurt, and he specializes in creating interactive content, mainly using an engine called Unity. So his experience is in creating interactive design for architecture, mobile, and some other creative applications. The other two were respondents from here in Zimbabwe. I'll start with the first, Tanyaradzwa P. Njerere, or as we call it, just Tanya. And Tanya is a recent graduate from a local university. She's an illustrator and graphic designer by trade. She prides herself in being an accomplished industrial designer. And then the final applicant was Mati. I'll leave Keith to say her whole name. I don't want to mess it up. And Mati is an aspiring writer, and she's also currently working as a copywriter intern at K-Media Africa.
Great. Yeah. And Keith, is there somebody else who has been helping you with the music?
Yes, so I was privileged. I've got an assistant in the studio, and he's a brilliant composer. So he pretty much did most of the composing, obviously under my direction. And he really came through. His name is Innocent Masamba, and yeah, you'll see a bit of him later in the presentation.
Fantastic. So without further ado, I think we're going to crack into the actual presentation. We're going to structure this kind of as the film would be developed and produced. So we're going to talk about the script development, where the idea came from, then we'll talk about the concept and visuals, before going into the storyboard and the animatic, which will also talk about the virtual reality and the Unity setup, then the animation, and finally we're going to show our latest kind of work in progress, where we're at with the project, and you guys a taste of what the project is looking like. So to start off, Eugene, could you kind of tell us about the origins of the project, how it came about and where the idea came from?
All right. So at Comexposed, we're always looking for opportunities to venture into projects that we would if we lived in a perfect world. And we're very lucky to be in Zimbabwe, where the British Council is very active in the arts. So towards the end of 2019, were made aware of a grant that would fund creative projects. And at that time, we were interested in exploring something that would go beyond just animation or comic books, which we're popularly known for through our Comic-Con. So after looking at this grant proposal or this advert, we realized that we actually had a few interesting ideas that we were able to explore. And based on what were the requirements, which meant one of which was to partner with a UK studio, I quickly had flashbacks of Katie, who I had met, I believe, in 2014 here in Harare. Though briefly, you know, Slurpee and Aaron's work kind of stood out, and I felt like they were the right fit for what we were about to pursue. So the whole idea was to pursue a project that would answer several questions about society, and also bring about opportunities for young artists to also collaborate and create an environment where we can have skill exchange between more advanced animators, such as our partners, and, you know, upcoming artists who'd then be able to get a feel of what it's like in a more friendly environment that's not your typical, you know, mainstream commercial studio. Everything is kind of fast-paced and impersonal. So Idea Bridge is the idea we came up with, which would test us really, because we, like I said earlier, we didn't want to do the same old animation, whether it was 3D or 2D, and we didn't want to do something that we had done before. So we thought of introducing a new element, which was VR, because we've been getting more and more interested in interactive content and also just new media outside of traditional film. So the Idea Bridge was this concept which would test us in all of those areas, including training and skills exchange, collaborating with remote partners, also tackling a narrative that meant something to the entire audience, all at the same time. And that was a huge leap. But we definitely were inspired by a genre called Choose Your Own Adventure, whereby we tell a story and allow our audience to engage with the story and actually choose the outcome of the given narrative. So that is a general explanation of the whole thing, just so I don't exhaust everything and we can't answer anything later.
Thanks, Eugene. So before we kind of talk about the film itself, do you think you could give a brief synopsis of what the story itself is, just to sum it up in terms of a narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about themes earlier on, and we wanted a universal theme because one of the objectives of this project was also to have some elements that would mean something to the UK community and also resonate with the African audience. So the synopsis was based on a simple theme, which is our differences, no matter what they are, whether they're gender, race, orientation, whatever, they don't take away from our humanity. So we came up with this idea of the Idea Bridge. And the story follows two different nations or little fictional countries that are at war for whatever reason. And they've been at war assumedly for, hundreds of years, maybe decades, who knows. And within this kind of environment, two little sentries named Monyo and Mini come across each other in the woods near, where this war has been taking place. And they have this conflict about who or what has kind of compromised the border. And they get into an argument and a fight ensues. So this fight leads them, into an accident that has them bound together because they fall into a ravine and they're attacked by this leech that kind of pulls them together and forces them to stay together while slowly draining them of their color or their life essence. And that's where the story kind of develops. And they're forced to challenge whether their differences are worth holding on to, as opposed to surviving and cooperating together until they, reach a different level of consciousness and acceptance that they're really the same. So that whole story is meant to address a lot of differences that exist in our reality, which we have, and we really can't justify why we opt to, hate and have conflict. And that's the basis of the story and what it's trying to interrogate or force everyone to kind of think about.
Okay, thank you very much. And at that stage, when you kind of pitched that story to us, and through yourself and Matty, that's where Katie came on board. So Katie, introducing yourself now. Do you talk about how you kind of, where you got involved in the script process and how that started, and how you were involved at that stage?
Sure. Well, I got involved, as you said, when the script was pretty much written, and we knew what they wanted from the characters and what was sort of the aim of the film, and we didn't really tweak it too much. That's all I have to say about that.
But I wanted to ask, writing a script for a virtual reality project is very different to a conventional short film, and so I wanted you to kind of maybe give some thought process behind that. How different is it? What kind of challenges presented themselves because it was a virtual reality project?
Yeah, it is quite a different process, and it was very much a learning process for us, because it's not something, VR isn't something we've really experimented with a lot before. The two main challenges or differences between a conventional film are location, because you have to figure out how you're going to move the character from one place to another. You can't just cut. So you have to move the audience with the characters, and time, because again, with not being able to just turn off the camera in the same way, your timeline gets compressed, and you have to be able to tell a story pretty much in one take. So those are the big areas that we had to look at in script, and really simplify the amount of locations that we use, the amount of places that the character went to, and the amount of time it took to get through the story.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
Hello, my name is Machinatsa Sheobe, and I am a writer. For the Idea Bridge project, I was the storyteller and script writer. So that means I had to come up with the plot and the story for the film and write script treatments as well. And if anyone had anything extra that they wanted to add, then I would edit the script and put in their additions and send it off. The Idea Bridge project was a really great experience for me. A little bit nerve-wracking at the beginning because, I was fresh out of high school and I had never done anything like this before. But it was really great, really eye-opening, and it was so great getting to see how scripts go from the page to the screen and the whole behind-the-scenes process, the edits and the revisions, and also getting to see how the scenes were animated and getting to see those come to life was really great. What I learned most from this experience was, to be confident and to be brave and to be bold with your ideas.
So, Eugene, how was Matty involved in the script writing process? How did you bring her into the project?
Yeah, so that was really interesting because she kind of fell into the deep end. Matty's a really bright young lady, and she's coming almost fresh out of high school. But her interest in script writing it really showed, because she was already using software like Celtic, which is professional script writing software. And she did come up with 5 different treatments or 5 different ideas that we didn't think really worked very well. But when she landed on this final one, because as she wrote, she came to learn about the challenges of VR, the challenges of animation. So, she was removing technical things that were not within our grasp or not within the capacity of our team. For example, large crowds, or certain things that our camera couldn't do. Certain scenes that had flashboards and things like that in some of our earlier treatments wouldn't have worked because we're going to use VR. So it was a learning curve, and she, like I said, she definitely was in the deep end because it was a short film, her first short film, and it happened to be in VR. So I think in total it took about 2 weeks before we reached this particular script that we then tweaked a lot more with Katie later on. But she really hung in there and did her best. We're really proud of her.
Great stuff. So I kind of have a final question about story, which kind of bridges onto the character design, the concept design. So the big kind of key factor of this project is that it was to foster the artistic collaboration between the UK and Zimbabwe artists. So when I say artists, script writers and also artists. So what do you think both countries have brought to both the storytelling and the design aspect of this project?
Katie?
Okay.
Well, most of my influences are probably British, but having spent a bit of time in Zimbabwe a few years ago and Kenya and some other places in Africa, I've always very much admired the African aesthetic and was pretty excited to try and include it in the film in this way. As soon as we started talking about a style, it was certainly the colours, because we wanted to use a dark background to sort of hide the things that the mechanics of how the scene was set up in VR, and to make sure that we didn't have to build every single element of the environment. So a dark background with bright African-inspired colours and patterns in the foreground, which we really hoped would help us direct the audience's eye. That can be one of the big problems in VR when the audience can look all around them in 360. You have to use colour with purpose to tell the audience where you want them to look at each point. So that's where we're trying to bring the African influences are. We also looked a lot at the work of Disney concept artist Mary Blair and her work on sort of Alice in Wonderland, and tried to bring in some of those fantastical shapes into the film as well. So I think that's the merging of American, more than British, but Western and African shapes and colours.
Sorry, Eugene, did you want to add anything?
Oh yeah, sure, just a little. Yes, we did have a lot. We borrowed from South African and Zimbabwean design. We incorporated a lot of the chevron and Great Zimbabwean in the shape of some of our buildings. And then in some cases, we just decided to just go full on creative and just go abstract with it. Our main characters don't have any specific human skin tone or skin color, which is something that really helped us to differentiate them and make it seem like we're not targeting any group from reality. And at the same time, we also just had fun. Katie's idea of just having this character with a helmet and goggles, almost like an aviator. But we really, as much as we tried to reference our own national identities, we also did our best to have fun with it.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to interject with, as a producer, how we manage this project. So obviously we're both based in two different countries. You guys are in Zimbabwe, we're in the UK, well actually Katie's in Saudi Arabia, so we're very far spread out here. So how we made it work, we've been using the project management tool Slack as our main means of communication, along with email. So at this stage, myself and Keith, we worked on a schedule and we put everything together, and uploading everything to Slack was our main way of communicating with the team. But I just wondered if both you guys, Eugene and Katie, you could talk about how you work together in developing the visuals and how the process of mutual feedback worked. Katie, do you want to?
Possibly Eugene's turn to go first, but sure. So yes, we use Slack as a project management tool. At the beginning, it was mostly me creating stuff, and because I was doing a lot of the pre-production work, and the other guys sort of commenting on it, tweaking on it, putting their suggestions into it. And as the process wore on, it was more them coming up with the music, the animation, the colours and stuff, and the designs, and then myself and Aaron commenting on it.
I can remember it being quite a collaborative process at this stage. I mean, it wasn't just the design, because we were still trying to work out the VR landscape, weren't we? We weren't just talking about, is this the right kind of design, the feel? It was, the layout was very important. We had to kind of do a map of what the 3D environment would look like from above so that Will could interpret it. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards and figuring stuff out.
Yeah, there was, especially when Will was involved. So I would maybe sketch something out, the other guys would comment on it. Will would put it into VR and we'd go, oh, actually, it's too much depth. The audience has too many opportunities to look over there. We need to shrink that. We need to give them a smaller field of vision or something like that. And we'd all sort of comment on it. As the VR process was very new to all of us, except Will. He had to do an awful lot of tweaking for us because our first ideas often just didn't work when you put 3D sphere.
Yeah, I remember it being very useful for Tanya, who was designing a lot of individual assets. So she was iterating very quickly and just submitting a whole pack of, grass and trees and so on. And as we moved on and made decisions about some colors and sometimes the types of trees, because some of the trees didn't look very indigenous, or we wanted to include some indigenous trees, she found it easier to just send over a bunch and say, okay, based on our last comments, here's some assets. And Will would be able to just take all of those and just pop them straight into Unity right away. So using Slack was very great for that iterative process for her as well.
And what was so great about the way Will set everything up in Unity is that so Tanya could produce an asset and then I could maybe tweak it in a few ways, but Will could just repopulate Unity with the improved, updated assets rather than having to rebuild the whole thing from scratch.
Yeah. I think it's important to also state that that process took such a long time. As recently as a few days ago, I actually fished up some of the older assets that we still had on Slack as we were cutting the teaser. And it was really helpful to find it all in an orderly kind of archive. And that was really helpful without having to bother Katie or Tanya at all. So that was great.
Yeah, I think the collaboration worked fairly well. I think it would have been quicker if we'd all been in the same room, but I don't think we suffered creatively. I think we maybe got more time to think about our responses by doing it in a way where we got a file and then we had a couple of days before we needed to reply.
Hi, my name is Tanyela Zwanjiriri, and I am a graphic designer and an animator, also an illustrator. I was chosen to be a part of Idea Bridge to be a graphic artist. So my involvement in the project was to design the assets that were in the environment itself. So from the buildings to the trees, to the grass, to the plants themselves, I was the one designing those. And also I assisted with animating. For the most part, I was applying color to the animation and also helping with timing and adding any extra animations that were necessary for the project. My experience, I will definitely say, was a wonderful one, because from this project alone, it had me thinking out of the box, combining different cultures and trying to make an environment that was systematic, that made sense. So combining Western and African cultures, making them into one, definitely stretched my imagination. So that was fun. And also there was designing with intention. For the most part, I would say I learned how to design with intention. Designing the colors, why are we putting the colors, explaining why we are designing things in a certain way so that it's all cohesive. And with that, I feel like it was a great learning experience as well.
Thanks, guys. So that kind of leads us nicely on to talking about Unity. So unfortunately, Will couldn't be here today, but we have a clip from him and he's going to talk about what his work involved. And alongside that, we're going to show what he was developing and what he could view from the headset. So over to that, guys, to view.
Hello, I'm Will Hurt, an artist from the UK. I primarily work with digital media. I became involved with the Ideas Bridge project last December, having previously worked with Comexposed on the 2019 Digipoems project, in which I made an interactive app in response to a poem by Pedro Julião, a Mozambican poet. I've also worked with the British Council as a resident on the 2018 CoLab Now programme, and then as a technical facilitator on the 2019 CoLab Now project. The Ideas Bridge project involved working with Comexposed and Slurpee Studios on a VR animation, something that was new to all of us. My role was to take assets created by the team and put them together in Unity to create a 3D world that people could explore and be guided through using a VR headset. It involved learning new pipelines and workflows and lots of testing using an Oculus Quest headset. We opted to work in Unity after doing some tests in After Effects and finding that the level of immersion was much greater when constructing a full 3D world that you can move your head around in whilst also being on rails. Working with the team was great. It was really enjoyable. Everyone was very motivated and really good at what they do. And it was a real pleasure to see the project's narrative develop and drop in all of these amazing high quality assets that were being produced in order to create this vivid world.
Okay, so now that we've seen how Will worked in Unity and putting the VR space together, we were kind of at the same time producing the animatic, weren't we, in the storyboard? This was a completely new thing to us, guys, making a storyboard and animatic for VR. We'd never had to process how it works, so it was a big learning curve for us. Eugene, could you discuss any of the issues that you found producing a storyboard and an animatic VR?
Yeah, it definitely was a new experience because as we didn't lock down a lot of scenes as quickly as we'd have hoped to, because the animatic definitely would reveal some problem areas or potential problem areas, especially around the issues of camera moves or scene transitions. That was probably the biggest setback. One of the biggest hurdles in storyboarding or creating animatics for VR was in and around the issue of solving scene transitions or making sure that we could demonstrate that we're moving from one part of the environment to the other without losing our viewer or without coming up with something that was just impossible for someone with a VR headset to actually do. The animatic really helped because unlike with conventional films, we actually had to ask ourselves questions about motion sickness, which is something you never really ask about, when you're making a real film. But it's a big consideration. Other considerations that came to mind were whether our viewer would be standing up or sitting down while experiencing this film. And all of those things played a part in how we not only created the animatic, but how we also sorted out the staging, how characters move. We had a really, we've got a dynamic fight sequence in the early bits of the film. And I think the animatic saved us a lot of trouble, but at the same time, it also would introduce areas where we were a little bit maybe short-sighted as well. So it was a big learning curve, like you said, Aaron. It was definitely a long learning process.
So, Katie, I thought I'd ask you the same question because you have 12 plus years of producing short film animatics, and this must be very different. You were quite involved in the animatic process, and we're going to show the animatic in its entirety in a second. So just wondered what your thoughts were on the challenges that you faced.
It was certainly a challenge. The first animatic that we put together, or the first scene, put together just like we would a sort of standard storyboard, and then spoke it through with Will and Eugene and Keith and everyone, and realised how many mistakes we'd made. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest one was the grabbing of the audience's attention. We needed them to turn sort of 180 degrees right at the beginning. And so we needed to come up with a way of doing that. And we chose a bee that would come in front of their face and physically move them around. And you have to deal with issues like, well, what if they don't turn? Do you have the bee come back and just keep doing it until they do turn? And what happens if they never do? Does the action just happen in front of them anyway? Do we cut? A whole lot of questions that we'd never really had to deal with before. There was also the building of the backgrounds in a way that was interesting enough so that they could look around and believe that they were in a rich, full world, but not interesting enough that it would take their attention when we wanted them to be looking at the bee. So that was the first scene on its own, the first challenge that we faced. And I think in solving that, and in doing that first, we came up with the solution for a lot of the later films that we had to deal with, and how we were going to physically move the audience from A to B. I also think, did you want to talk about it? Sound effects had a lot to do with that. The bee in front of their face and then moving. So if they didn't turn, it would just buzz behind their head until they.
I think Keith's going to touch on that in a little bit more detail in a second. Yeah. But we'll show the animatic now. You've seen quite a lot of what we're thinking from Will's walkthrough, which we've just shown. But the animatic will really kind of show these kind of devices that we're introducing to kind of make the viewer turn and pay attention to where we needed them to for the narrative purposes.
Can I say something else then?
Sorry, Katie.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't mean to. But can I say something else on storyboarding? The other issue that we faced is in creating a tone for the audience. Often you use camera movements. You use the angle at which the camera is seated to suggest, someone is proud, someone is dominant in the scene. But in VR, the camera stays at the height of the viewer's eyes. So we had to rethink a lot how we told the story. People are very used to film language, and they read it without, even a child can read film language without knowing that they've learned it. But VR is a completely different headspace, and we had to relearn that from scratch, and not fall back on all the tropes that we've used for years to tell our stories and to imply things about certain characters.
Absolutely agree. So on that note, we'll show you guys the animatic now, which has a scratch music track, which Katie placed down when she put the animatic together, which Keith then used to kind of give the interpretation and some inspiration kind of mood we wanted to create. So enjoy the animatic.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Okay, so that kind of moves us on nicely to the music and sound design, which Keith is going to talk to us about. As I said previously, Katie's scratch track was a basis for Keith to move on to producing the music. So Keith, how did it work? What was your process for coming up with the musical score and the sound effects?
Well, Katie's scratch track pretty much made it very easy for us because it gave us the ideal mood of each scene and what we were going after in terms of the sound and feel of the entire score. So from that, because we wanted to have the fusion of African elements with Western genres as well, we had to think around how we were going to incorporate those two. And I began by just doing some simple compositions, which I sent to the team just for feedback. And then that became the basis of, okay, this is what they like, this is what they don't like. And we then decided to, okay, from the feedback, we realized that, okay, we're not going to go the digital route. We're not going to use too many synthesizers and that sort of thing for the score. And we're going to go for a natural feel. So that already gave us a direction on the type of instrumentation to use, using the scratch track that we had been given. So basically, we then resolved that, look, okay, let's take elements from the African, and Katie actually uploaded some of her guides in terms of African music that she had listened to, and she's like, oh, I really like this kind of sound, and this is a project that I've seen that used this kind of African music. And because of the animatic, it had some sort of flow. It kind of felt like it was a dance of some sort, a dance routine, like a dance, what could we call it? Like a musical in a way. And we decided to follow that rhythmic flow of the music. So we decided to use a lot of orchestral instruments, and then blending those with African, especially Zimbabwean instruments. So you're talking your mbiras and marimbas, and we blended that together to create a nice sequence, which you obviously hear when we play the trailer, and then experience in full when you actually experience the VR film. So that's what we kind of did. So I sat down with a brilliant young composer who was up and coming. His name is Innocent, and gave him the direction, gave him some influences in terms of African influences, and some of my favorite Western score composers. And he came up with some concepts, and then we would go on from there and tweaking things, and I would be guiding him and directing him. And I really wanted to allow him to experience the full composition process. It was tempting to come in and say, okay, let me fix that and let me do that, but I managed to really restrain myself and just guide through, and he actually ended up pretty much composing the entire thing under some direction. And then I eventually took what he had done and then rearranged it and made it flow with the animatic. So that's pretty much the process that we went through.
I have to say it was fantastic. The first time we heard your score, it just matched what we were expecting, what we were hoping, and you took the inspiration from Katie and you just came up with a really good first draft. Was fantastic. So it was great. I did want to ask a technical question here. Obviously, we talked about timing in virtual reality. You don't know how long an audience member is looking at an action. So we have that issue with music as well. So obviously, when you're composing a score for a short film, you know exactly how many seconds it lasts. But with virtual reality, you don't know how long someone's going to be spending looking at in a certain location. So how does that affect composing? How does it work in VR?
It did affect the way we usually work, in the sense that the way we had to set up the project and the arrangement of the music had to have VR in mind. Because with VR, we're going to have music for each scene, and it's going to be a loop. Because as Katie mentioned, if someone doesn't look where they're supposed to look, like for example, when the bee goes behind, if they don't look, that music, there shouldn't be like a break in the music. The music will continue playing for that scene, and it's sort of like a loop. And it will only change once they turn and a new scene is introduced. and the music then goes in. So we had to arrange the score in such a way that we can create different sections that are loopable, but at the same time present something for the animatic that flows. So that was a bit of a challenge. And even when then cutting for the trailer, I had to explain to the animation team that, guys, this is going to be a bit challenging because of the way we set up the project. And if you guys change anything from the timing of the animatic, it's going to be a problem. And gladly they did it. So we managed to give them a nice track for the teaser.
Great stuff. Now we're going to hear from Innocent, who was working alongside Keith, and a little clip that he's prepared for us.
Hello, what's up? My name is Innocent Masamba. I am music producer at K Media Africa. I composed the music for Idea Bridge, the animation film, and I'm here to talk about the process that I went through making the music. Basically, I was handed some direction by the music director and also some what we call reference tracks to basically make music that sort of sounds like the reference tracks. But you know, I also input my own should I say creativity by looking at the animation itself and going through the emotion of the film. Basically, so if you've seen the film, you know that, you know, it's two, you know, should I say enemies, two animated enemies living in two different towns, and, you know, basically, so they're at war for a flower. So yeah, basically I took that emotion and infused the African instruments like the mbira and marimba and also some Western elements to basically make the music to that animation film. The process itself was fun. I'll admit and say it's my first time making a music score. That's actually the professional name for it. And yeah, but it was fun. It was enlightening. I had a lot of fun making the music, basically. Yeah.
One more question. So the music, you've described the process and how that worked. So could you talk about the sound effects as well? I mean, that's very important, obviously not just for the narrative, but again, like Katie was saying, where the audience looks. We use that as a device as well to kind of lead the audience. So could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, so the sound effects are, I don't want to say more important, but they're more apparent when it's VR rather than in a traditional film, because they're used also as triggers, so they have to be a bit more accurate. And if you're doing film, you can, you know, if the sound effect is not as pronounced, it can be, you know, blended into the music. But here, because you want it to be a trigger, it has to be very clear what it is. So if you want a buzzing bee, you can't switch it to a wasp or whatever, and then try and, you know, EQ it or put sound effects to make it sound like a bee. It has to be a very clear bee so that someone can really feel like, oh, that bee that was in front of me is now behind me. So things like that. The sound effects had to be on point. But then also the other thing is that now we can't arrange them the way we traditionally do that in a sequencer, because they're going to be placed in the VR environment to become triggers. So for example, if the person's going to look left and the bee is going to be right, we need that sound to be triggered right. So we're just going to be creating little loops that are a collection of sound effects that are then going to be deployed into the VR environment and placed in the right space, in the right audio space, where they're going to be triggered. So, but then for the purposes of the trailer and the animatic, you can just throw in some sound effects as usual, as you would do in a normal animated film.
Yeah. Well, it kind of seems we've all been faced with so many challenges at every stage of production. So that music and sound is just as steep a learning curve for you as well. So Eugene, wondering if you could talk a little bit about the animation process. I know that we were producing a 2D animation in a 3D environment. So could you talk about what led you to the decision that this should or could be a 2D film within a virtual reality environment?
Well, looking at the team that we had, every visual artist on the team had a strong background in 2D animation, and demonstrated or just had a portfolio that was really strong in illustration as well. So TV Paint was a natural fit because it would help us lean on our strengths. So using TV Paint within a VR environment also helped us, or it helped us lead to a concept that was a bit more unique, because when you think of VR, you think of 3D and you think of 3D objects. And that style of animation is very popular now, but we wanted it to be a lot more artistic. We wanted to have that kind of control that drawing your own characters and assets brings in. And also, given the type of team we had, it was a good idea to go with TV Paint because of the training aspect that was involved. Animating frame by frame gives you more opportunity to have someone who's learning how to animate collaborate with you, because they can be either your in-betweener, or they can be a colorist, or they can be a cleanup artist, many different roles where they can come in and actually have first-hand experience. We didn't feel like we'd have that same opportunity if we'd gone with software like Adobe Animate or Flash, because it would have been a matter of just tweening objects here and there, rigging bones, and then we're on our way. So TV Paint was definitely one of those tools that would also help us give it a more organic feel, because we had elements within our script where we wanted to deliberately show dynamic liquids, or like one of our antagonists is not very rigid, and we felt like drawing it frame by frame would have added a bit more life to it, added a bit more of a natural appearance to it. It didn't introduce, using TV Paint didn't introduce too many hurdles in terms of translating it into the 3D workspace, because we were rendering out every element was rendered out in a layer. For example, for a character would render out one character on their own, and then in some cases render out their line work only, render out their color only, and then composite everything together. So all those different clips, because we ended up with a humongous library of props, assets like the vegetation, the environmental assets, each building, etc. And then the actual animation, the characters moving or the arrows hitting buildings and so on. So having all of those on a transparent card allowed Will then to be able to position the animation, those clips onto real 3D planes. That way we'd be able to kind of composite things, but in virtual reality or 3D space. So TV Paint for us, it lended itself very well, because again, it was outputting files that we could easily retime or color correct, or tweak a little in After Effects and still have the same result, which is a movie clip with transparency that can work well in a 3D engine.
Thank you very much. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to show the work in progress. Eugene, would you like to introduce it before I press play?
This would be the teaser. All right, sure. So what you're about to watch is not representative of the virtual reality immersive experience you're going to get, but this is a teaser that shows off our visual style and gives away a bit of the story. It's a lot of months of work, even though it's about 3 minutes long. And you're going to see the introduction of our main characters and the trouble that they managed to get themselves in. So coming up is the Idea Bridge Spirit Walk trailer.
Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed the trailer. We're going to kind of wrap the presentation up now, just by going around each of us and saying what we kind of each learned from virtual reality. I'm just going to kick this off to say that from a producer's point of view, it wasn't that different from a management point of view. But I'm fascinated by how each facet of production has been altered, and just learning how to tell a story from a viewer standing in one space and having to, the whole narration is where they look, and that was fascinating. And I would love to work in VR again. But Katie, have you got any tips or advice or things you've learned from this project?
I think that I've learned that most filmmakers are control freaks, and I am no exception. We like to be in control of telling the audience where we want them to look, and VR takes that away from you. It puts a lot more power in the audience's hands, and I don't like that. That's my main learning, I think. It's a very interesting form of filmmaking, but I think it limits the stories that you can tell, and the lack of film language, it takes away some of the artistry, if I'm honest. That's my learning. Sorry.
Would you like to work in VR again?
I would not, no.
Okay, that's an honest answer. Eugene, how about yourself? What did you learn? And your thoughts, would you work in it again as well?
I learned that you can never know everything, and the greatest master is the eternal student, like someone once said. So I feel like even though I've worked exclusively in 3D before, and I have worked in 2D before, there was so much learning to do while teaching. So it was a very, very profound experience for me. There was so much learning to do, and I felt like a kid again, which was good.
And you'd enjoy it enough to work again? You're looking forward to it?
I'll definitely give it another try.
Being different to Katie.
Because I'm stubborn mostly.
And how about yourself, Keith? From both an executive producer and also a musician's point of view, how did you find it?
From the executive producer perspective, it was easier to sell the concept of VR and get the funding. And then now when you start the project, you see that it's more difficult than you thought, because in your head, you've got this idea and you say, oh yeah, we could do this. And I remember as part of the interviews for the funding application, they asked us, are you really going to be able to pull this off on this budget? And we were like, absolutely sure. We're like, yeah. And then now when it's coming time to manage the budget and you're seeing the time that everyone is spending, and you're like, maybe we kind of under budgeted, but we made it work. And and from a music perspective, just like what Katie said, VR kind of removes the control, because as a music producer, you have control over how people hear things and how you want it to sound and how you want it to come out. But then in the case of VR, it kind of dictates how you should do it. So you kind of are kind of following it instead of you being in control. And now you're thinking, because I remember, I had a structure and a plan, but when we had a conversation and Will was saying, well, in VR, I kind of need the music to loop and do certain things. And now you're thinking, that means the way I was thinking of working is totally not going to work. So now I had to change the way I work. And I felt like I was a servant to the project rather than the master of the project, the narrator of the project. Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic learning curve, and I've enjoyed learning how VR works, especially. So that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. The project is still ongoing at the moment. We're doing the final stages of animation, and we're looking to wrap up in early 2021, and we look forward to sharing the final project in VR next year. Do you guys want to add anything to finalize at all? Or are we all good? Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for the insight. And like I say, we're looking forward to sharing the project next year. So say goodbye to everyone, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.